You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome back, everyone. We are back again for another season of First Contact, the Star Trek The Next Generation intro cast. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This week, we are talking about The Best of Both Worlds Part 2. It first aired the week of September 24th, 1990. It was written by Michael Piller and directed by Cliff Bowl. James, what happens in this one?
After the Enterprise's plan to fire a best from the deflector fails, the Borg set a course for Earth. A fleet of 40 ships engage the cube at Wolf 359, but the Enterprise is unable to join them, having burned out the warp core. When they arrive at the site of the battle, they find all the ships destroyed, but prepare to engage the Borg once again. An audacious series of maneuvers sees the Enterprise recapture Picard, but he remains in the hostile guise of Locutus. While they can't separate the man from the machine, Data establishes a way to hack the Borg's collective consciousness. But can he stop them before Earth is destroyed? And can they save Picard? Yes, because this week's episode is not a cliffhanger.
Well, this is the follow-up to perhaps the greatest cliffhanger of all time. Alex, you had never seen it before, but now you have. Did it live up to all the hype, or was it a crushing disappointment? And I don't know why I'm talking like this.
Well, I think we all agreed last time that Best of Both Worlds Part 1 was one of the best episodes we've had of the series so far. Very exciting, ends on a really interesting note. Where's it going to go next? And you know, if you're listening to this podcast, maybe you're thinking, what are we going to say about Part 2? It's exciting. God, tell us! I can't wait any longer. Well, instead of going through that, why don't we sit and have a meeting? And then maybe have another one. I'm being harsh for humour's sake. It's still a good episode, but it can never deliver on the promise that the initial episode sets up, which is, I'm sure, a result of not really planning where it was going to go at this point, and then trying to discover as they go along. And I imagine there's probably budget constraints that also play into it. I think there's certain things that maybe betray that. It's still entertaining, it's still good, but it doesn't have quite that same sense of tension and immediacy that the first part has. And there are certainly points throughout it where you really want it to just keep going like the first part did, and it just decides to sit down and have a fag.
You can see that from the very first moment, because you have this last time on Star Trek, The Next Generation, and it's like, wow, that happened, and then that happened, and then Riker says fire. And instead of the next bit being you seeing the ship fire, you've got Geordi going, well, it's almost charged up now. Yep, few seconds. Yep, we're now ready to fire.
I could not believe that. The fact that it ended last time with fire. Okay, wait 6 seconds, sir. 6 seconds! What was so necessary about those 6 seconds that we just had to see them?
They need to build up the tension even more.
What that did is it dissolved the tension immediately, because it's like, fire, oh my god, I think Riker's about to kill Picard and blow up the Borg ship. And then it's like, well, just wait a minute.
Well, then it all sort of goes a bit Monty Python, the Holy Grail with, oh, that didn't work. Oh, of course, yeah, he knows exactly what we would do. Run away!
The cliffhanger seems like the only thing that can happen is that Picard is going to die, or the Enterprise is going to get destroyed. But actually what happens is nothing. Essentially, it is, well, that didn't work. Oh, they've gone. They've gone now.
Why do the Borg leave? I mean, I'm sure there's probably a legitimate story reason that I've missed there, but I got the impression last time that it was a face-off to the death. Whereas it's here, it's a case of, oh, no, your weapons don't actually work. Well, we'll be on our way now.
In the same way that a crew member walking down a Borg cube is just completely ignored because they don't see them as a tangible threat, They just don't see the Enterprise as any threat whatsoever, so they're just not going to deal with it. They're just going to leave.
It's very much that fortune protects fools, little children, and ships named Enterprise kind of thing. It's because the script says so, and I think there's a couple of examples of that in this episode. And then, of course, the Borg go off to face the big battle at Wolf 359, possibly the biggest conflict that Starfleet's seen since the Battle of the Binary Stars, which is so well documented in Star Trek lore. I genuinely think there is a kind of lesson there, because Star Trek Next Generation, as you've mentioned, its default setting is have a meeting, and I quite like that about it. And here they have the opportunity, if not the budget, to show an enormous space battle. And in Deep Space Nine, you'll see loads of ships fighting and fleets and proper war. But I do wonder, is it more powerful not to see the battle, to just arrive and see some wreckage as if someone has gone mad at hobbycraft and just thrown all the kits all over the floor?
I think it's far more effective for us not to see the battle. Us seeing it means we completely understand the threat. Not seeing it, we have no idea what the Borg can really do. All we know is there were 40 ships and they're now gone.
And you got to say it does wonders for the budget.
It does, but there are advantages to having a lower budget and not feeling the need to show everything. There are some great Star Trek episodes that have shown big battles. Deep Space Nine, particularly in Season 7, had a fair few giant space battles, which were wonderful. I think of Enterprise Season 3 had a fair few. One in Twilight, which is one of the best episodes of Star Trek ever made. But sometimes it's effective for us to only see the aftermath. We're seeing a graveyard of ships that 2 hours before were all full of people.
And of course it made more effective. One of those ships was the one Riker was going to take command of last episode, as if you can remember that 3 months later. The Melbourne. Oh, and nobody says, Riker, that was the ship you were meant to take command of in the last episode, isn't it? All the better. I guess they knew this would get kind of shown together later on, that everyone would see it. The gap would disappear.
The gap disappears, but it's still all about the cliffhanger. We never think of it as Best of Both Worlds, the story. We think of it as Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and Best of Both Worlds Part 2.
Well, unless you buy that Blu-ray, where they've edited it together as one. And it suddenly has a massive lag.
The very reason we didn't record this as just one episode is because of that cliffhanger, because it is the most important cliffhanger in television history, unless you're a big Dallas fan. But especially in terms of Star Trek, I think it's so important. And if we just done it as one episode, I think it would have lessened the impact. I think there's a lot to talk about in resolving an impossible cliffhanger. And other shows have come to that since. Doctor Who would back itself into that corner on multiple occasions after it came back. And I suppose Star Trek does it again, but I don't think it ever does it to this degree. Because it's that reasonably new show 3 years into its life, you do feel that anything can happen and things might change. You weren't into the sort of sixth comfortable season with everything being the same and them lining up a movie franchise. It still did have that potentially, well, things could change here.
I think maybe that's one of the biggest criticisms that you can make, is that you mentioned Doctor Who, and one thing that Doctor Who learnt very early on after its revival in 2005 was that if you're doing a two-parter, quite often the best way to handle that is to have the second parter suddenly take a very different tone to what was happening in the first part. And they've done it several times throughout the series since then. And it always works well because it means that you're not just repeating what you've done previously. there is an element of that here. That lesson hasn't necessarily been learnt here. Not that you would expect them to. We're talking a much longer time ago. But yeah, it does mean that you sort of get to like meeting scenes, or well, we don't know if we can get the Enterprise ready in time. You think, kind of feel like we've been here a little bit before, even if we haven't on certain points. It does feel a little bit like we're treading water at times, when what we want is to see more of what does it mean that Picard's been made into a Borg.
Well, without jumping too far ahead, and without spoiling too much about the next episode, I feel that the episode that follows this is very much part 3 and deals with the fallout of Best of Both Worlds, and is just as important as part 2 is. And that means that even though you might criticise part 2 as repeating certain beats from part 1, I think part 3, which is the episode Family, takes all the character developments that you want from this big story and tells it in a very different tone. So I'd hold off before judging Best of Both Worlds completely as of now.
It's not necessarily that I want lots of character development. I mean, that's always good, but what I'd happily settle for here is more of the body horror, in a way, which is something that they'll examine a little more when they get to the films. Because we have a little bit here. You have Picard laying on the table, being turned white, and that one tear coming down his face. And that's a powerful image, and you kind of think, some more of that. The other side of that is that having that once kind of hits home a bit more. But there's probably other areas where they could have expanded on that, maybe.
I suppose the meat of the episode is still Riker, because that's what part 1 is all about. Is he ready for the captain's chair? And here he gets that opportunity. He gets promoted to captain, just in the field though. And the question is, can he outdo Picard? Has he moved beyond Picard, or was he just living in the shadow of him? And the episode sort of sets out to answer that, because for the first time in a very real scenario, it's not war games or anything like that. You get to play them against each other. You get to see who is the master. Do they actually know each other as well as they think they do? Can they be unpredictable with each other? And the episode sort of goes on to suggest, yes, Riker is a great tactician. Riker can outthink Picard if he's placed in that scenario. And you have this scene with Guinan, which I'm not sure about, really, because obviously she's very much the in some ways Picard's mentor or confidant, and they have this conversation, and then I sort of think, okay, Guinan, in this scenario, is it that helpful to be giving Riker quite cryptic advice about what he has to do? It just seems like she's coming in and saying quite vague stuff to him, and you think, well, just be direct. Don't sort of say, well, maybe this. Being all fortune teller, and you think, well, I don't really see what this scene is doing for the episode. Never mind, sort of what it does for Riker. I get that it's saying, move on, stop thinking like him, stop being like him, and so it does serve that purpose. But it's kind of irritating as well.
Yeah, the minute it starts going, riddle me this.
Guinan is just trying to help. And I mean, it's not like she knows that Picard definitely survives because she's met his future self in the past. Because that would be ridiculous.
Yeah. It would be as ridiculous as her getting picked up on the Enterprise B. So, the whole thing is that Riker has a plan, and he's going to carry out this plan. And this plan is amazing and brilliant, and outwits Picard, and outwits the Borg. And you watch it and you think, is that clever? Did they need to do something more? Did they need to do something more surprising and dramatic and just something that does wow the audience, because it's very well executed and it's nicely done and there's lovely model shots and it sort of works, but it all feels too easy to me.
So, just rolling back a second, because obviously, I've only seen it once, so I'm going off memory, but Riker's plan is to separate the ship, but instead of attacking from the half of the ship they normally would, he attacks the Borg from the half of the ship that normally has the families in. That's the sum of his plan.
I mean, he puts out some fireworks as well, and also a shuttle goes.
Everyone loves fireworks.
Yeah, everyone does love fireworks, and he uses a shuttle with a transporter on it, which is a big development. They'll all have them soon, though. Like, the tiniest shuttle with a transporter on it soon. Yeah, But
the plan here really is that he's going against type for Starfleet. He's going to rescue one person when that's a ridiculous thing to do. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. He's putting everyone at risk just for Picard. So, from the Borg's perspective, they wouldn't do that. That's a ridiculous thing. So Riker is thinking, this is what we have to do, because the Borg wouldn't expect us to do it. The only problem with that is it's the type of thing that the Enterprise would have done in the last 3 seasons.
Well, that's sort of my point. Surely Picard would have predicted that.
Unless he is expecting, after Riker opened fire on the Borg and thought they were going to destroy them, that Riker is reverting to type for a Starfleet captain and would, always just try and attack the Borg rather than try and rescue Picard. But that's stretching it a little. But I still think if you don't analyse it too much...
if you don't think about it...
it works in the sense of Picard is expecting a Starfleet-style plan and Riker delivers a more Enterprise-style plan.
I mean, I'm being harsh. I'm fundamentally fine with it. My only slight reservation is that what you were saying earlier, Andrew, about it being a continuation of that theme of is Riker ready for the command, etc., etc., etc. To then have the core of his plan be, well, we better get our captain back. I don't know. I don't know if that feels that it slightly undermines it. I get that there's a side reason to do that. I get that if they can bring him aboard, that maybe they can use him against them. But I don't know. Something at the back of my mind just bugs me a little bit that maybe that undermines some of the development that they're going for.
I think it does, and it's just the nature of the show, isn't it? Because actually, at the end, well, you can have any ship you want. You've saved the Federation, you've saved Earth. No, I'll stay here. And I guess that is the development, that he is... The revelation is he was happy all along where he was, and he is ready for command, but why should he go somewhere else if he's happy?
Which was literally how we started the previous part.
Yeah. But they've asked the question, they've answered the question, they've asked the question again, and they've come to the same conclusion.
I suppose maybe I'd have liked one extra sort of reason for Riker to stay. That he felt a duty to stay as well. That, I don't know, that maybe everything that he's been through in this part makes him feel more conflicted on the issue, perhaps, but then something makes him feel that he has to stay at the end, a duty of care to Picard or something. That once everyone's left, he's not convinced that Picard is as well as he makes out. I realise we're writing another episode here, but just something else so that it's not literally the same reason as the one at the beginning of part 1.
Well, I think you've actually kind of hit the nail on the head there. He does need to stay because he was needed on board the Enterprise to stop the Borg. He was best serving Starfleet right where he is. So why should he leave?
I think maybe that point just needed to be made a little more directly then.
You know, in the later movies, where everybody's a captain, but they're all just serving on the bridge. It's like Captain Scott, Captain Spock, Captain Kirk, and, you know, Kirk's still in command. Should they have done that? Should they just have had him be a captain and Data be a commander, and then, you know, it's just silly, but it's fine because they've all been in the show that long that they had it written into their contracts that they had to be a captain.
Riker's a captain on his own ship in the novels, so, you know, he gets to be captain there.
So, I know you can wander around a Borg ship, but I did really think that... I did think that Data and Worf just grabbing the old man seemed a little bit easy. I just thought, okay, right. You just get him and get back on the shuttle there.
I mean, if one thing's apparent, it's why urban explorer videos aren't a thing in the Star Trek universe. There's no danger of being caught walking around a warehouse.
It does very much seem that way. I don't know if that kind of neutralizes the threat. It doesn't really feel like we see the Borg in this episode, especially. You know, we've got Locutus on the ship, we've got the exterior of the ship, and it's like, well, where are the rest of them?
Also, I got the impression from the last part, and indeed this part as well, that they've made Picard, when they've made him into Locutus, he's quite an important figure for the Borg Collective. I know they're collective, so there shouldn't be one part that's more important, but to their current plan, he is quite important. Why is he just stumbling around the corridor? I mean, to the extent that they captured him, they grabbed him, I didn't necessarily realise it was Picard to start with. My attention had just distracted momentarily, and I looked and went, is that Picard? Well, I assume so. It's a balding man.
Yeah, I did exactly the same. In fact, I think I got distracted for a moment, and then they were bringing him back on board the Enterprise. When did that happen? What? Like, yeah. But that's my fault, or maybe it's the episodes for not holding me as much as the last one did.
When you can't immediately identify him from that red beam coming out of his eye, that's how you know he's an evil bastard. It's because he's like one of those tossers that goes around with a little laser pen shining it in your eyes. I mean, by now he should have blinded half the crew. Without that, it's very difficult to tell him apart at a distance, which I guess is the point.
I think that's a bit racist, Alex.
Brexit Britain.
So I guess the big exciting thing that happens in this episode for me, not only is there a saucer separation, but you get to see the battle bridge again. The battle bridge with all its nice 4-3 cathode ray tube TVs on it, which I think it looks quite nice actually, though, the set. It looks far more oppressive and a bit better lit than the main Enterprise bridge. It's a bit dangerous.
And we'll never see it again.
No, you never see it again.
Anytime they want to go a bit moody, that's their go-to, really, isn't it?
And in one shot in particular, it looks like it's a lot lower resolution than the rest of the set, doesn't it? Like the rest of the bridge.
I think that was an artistic choice.
Is that 30 seconds that they couldn't upscale?
They just had to upscale the SD material because they couldn't locate the original footage.
And that's why you've got that weird one of them saying Riker 0, but they both say Riker 1, and they've redubbed it. And it's very weird. But, yeah, that upscale shows just how horrible that transfer was of the standard definition footage, because people won't appreciate now, because they watch Star Trek Next Generation on Netflix, and it looks very pretty and gorgeous, but, like, that standard definition transfer, even at the time, was rotten. I don't know if, like, they just transferred it using a machine with a bit of a blurry screen, but especially the early seasons looked so awful, And just seeing that there, it just was like, did we really used to live like that? And in many ways we've lost something, because that was the look of the show, and you had that video composited effects, which we've lost. But that's what the show looked like, and for a whole generation, that's kind of what the next generation felt like. And I think it feels different now in high definition, and I'm glad we can continue to enjoy it. But it's not quite the same show that it once was.
I'm much happier with the HD version. Season 1 was abominable. It was one of the worst looking TV shows on DVD. It was wretched. And even Deep Space Nine does not look good. By Voyager, it's okay. It's, the same as any other TV show on DVD. But they really need to update Deep Space Nine into HD, which we're really hoping will happen after this documentary, which has been very successful. And they're going to do HD clips in the documentary, so maybe CBS will listen to the fans and do DS9 HD, so we don't have to suffer a very blurry picture.
Back on the Enterprise, they've got Picard, and he's being a bit Borgy and being like, I'm going to assimilate you. Klingons, yeah, we're going to assimilate them. He's got attitudes, and that's all well and good. But the plan, let's hook up Data.
I mean, yeah. I'm sure nothing could go wrong here. And yeah, in fact, that was kind of the way that I was assuming it was going to go. That you plug him in, it seems to be going well, and then just as you think everything's going well, there's a transfer, he's opened up the channels, and oh great, and then you realise that, I don't know, Data's not speaking, and then they realise that Picard is transferring into Data or something like that. Unfortunately, by this point, they've moved so far through the episode, it's not really an option available to them anymore. Yeah, it's It's a gamble, isn't it?
There is that one moment where Data goes processing and he sounds a bit turned on by it, and you think, oh.
Do you?
Well.
Oh, processing.
That does seem like it would be a story thread, but it's like, no, I'm into the system, into the Borg. That didn't take long. And we appreciate Data's very sophisticated. But it just none of it has the momentum of the first part. None of it has the immediacy or the. It all seems like, it feels like it's being written in front of your eyes, doesn't it? It's like, well, what are our options? Well, we could do this, and you go, okay, we can do this. Oh, shall he be the bad guy? No, we don't have time to be the bad guy. He can get in. Well, what's the problem of getting in? Well, he's got to go through 3 levels of getting in. The first one doesn't work. The second one doesn't work. The third one, yeah, rule of 3. He gets in. He's into the system, and he does some processing. We'll keep him processing for a little while.
What, data entry?
Excellent, excellent work. And we will leave it there.
And yet, no one mentions that weird arm attachment. We've mentioned it before. We've thought it's weird. They're all stood around looking at it, going. No one says, well, what are you going to do with that then?
I'm going to wave it at you.
And he looks so disappointed when it's removed. What will I do now that I can't wave this servo in your face? Also, they do just kind of let him wander around the Enterprise looking at their various screens and whatnot. I realise that he has a memory of the ship, but clearly they have a plan ongoing, and clearly he's still linked to the Borg. Is that not a really terrible idea?
Well,
he's in sickbay. He's not going to cause any harm. I assume he's isolated from the computer.
I don't. They're rubbish at that. Like, I don't think they've even got antivirus software.
They hook him up to one of the most powerful computers on the ship.
I think that people are very harsh on this ending. I think it works in the sense of we've set up the idea that the Borg are beating humans and the Federation by having that insight from Picard. And the only way that they've managed to get the upper hand back from the Borg is by getting Picard back and having his insight into the Borg be used against them. So that they're doing the exact same thing back to the Borg that they've done to them. In that sense, on a basic level, it's exactly the way you should end the episode. Maybe they could have done better to build up the tension, although they were about to ram the ship into the Borg cube, so there is a fair amount of tension there.
Maybe in a way what we're thinking here is that you could have started the series on a two-parter itself, which I realise is extravagant, but it's not unheard of. A loose three-parter, again, Doctor Who's done it, ending with Picard taking over Data. I don't think they necessarily have enough story to move into a third part, but that would be a good cliffhanger to move to. That would be the next logical progression. The problem is that, as you say, they seem to be writing it as they go along, and my rudimentary reading around the subject has discovered that that's because that's exactly what they were doing.
I think that, as I've already said, that it is basically a three-parter. The following episode does carry on a lot of the story beats that they couldn't get through here, but the following episode is very, very different. And I think we'd be poorer for having this Borg story stretched out and not having that following episode which lets us consider how the events are going to impact the characters in the future, which I think is why it was wise to resolve the story in this episode. And I think at this point in the show, it was still episodic. It's very, very unusual for Star Trek to tell a story that's longer than 45 minutes. The only other occasion it's done it is Encounter at Farpoint, which was a 45-minute episode padded out. At this point, it's very unusual to tell a longer story. I think it's asking too much to expect them to suddenly say, you know what, we can't resolve this in 45 minutes. Let's go for another hour and a half with this.
What, in kind of the same way it's expecting too much to ask Patrick Stewart to shave off his chest hair. But Patrick, the white paint on your body, it looks really dodgy. It just looks matted and clumped. It doesn't look right. Well, I frankly don't care. I think what the audience wants to see.
That was the only reason he got a new contract, was because he agreed to... He said, I want a topless scene in the first episode, and that's the only reason I'm going to come back for this.
I think what this show needs is robo-pants. I feel very strongly on the subject. And a little arm that goes... Vzz.
I think the costume design in general is very good, but essentially what you end up is with a man in black pants with a robot arm on.
And a few little stuck-on parts, yeah. Well, but apparently it's okay, because those implants won't be difficult to remove. Well, it's because they're stuck on with double-sided tape.
And I think maybe maybe that sums up the indignity of the whole situation.
Oh, there's a lot of indignity. I'm standing here in my pants, my robo pants, painted white. It reminds me very much of my experience with John Gielgud.
Part of the issue might be that it's a HD upgrade, and in SD we didn't criticise it quite so much because we couldn't see all of the imperfections.
Are you describing Patrick Stewart's chest hair as an imperfection?
Yes. That scene where it's essentially, I can't shut down any of the main systems, I can't control them, and then Picard says, sleep Data, and then Dr. Crusher utters the worst line in the history of Star Trek. He's exhausted.
Well, thank God we have such a professional medical practitioner on board.
As if he's saying, sleep, Data, sleep. Does he want Data to take him to bed and read him a story?
He's exhausted. I thought he maybe could benefit from one of my homeopathic remedies.
Yeah, fine. But then, isn't that clever? They use a non-essential system in order to shut them down. And that's very clever. And they save the Earth. Great.
It's fine. You know, I don't want to get hat up over it because it does the job. It's effective. It gets us to the end. I don't have a problem with it. I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say it's satisfying. It's convenient. But at least you've got that thing of turning their strength into a weakness. So there's something to be gained there, but again, it does kind of portray them making it up as they go along.
I just think it was impossible to do this in a satisfying way, and perhaps if they'd done a completely different episode, it would also slightly let it down, because again, it's not bad. None of it is bad.
No.
It's got scale, you know, you do see sort of Wolf 359, you see Earth, so it's got those bigger stakes, almost those bigger stakes that the movies feel they need to put in. We're going to attack Earth. Well, no one's mentioned Earth up to now. Why are you interested in Earth? Because the audience have heard of it. And it maybe does that, and it's sort of like, well, in Star Trek we're never interested in Earth. We don't really care about Earth, ever. And then it's just there's this sort of slightly, I don't know, there's just slightly this slightly nebulous thing, and it's Earth, and it's bad that the Earth's going to get destroyed, and you think, yeah, it's bad. It's just as long as you don't go into the past to change the present.
I think that's the thing it's missing, though, the impending peril. Although it's set up story-wise that it's there, that they're heading for Earth, they're almost at Earth, because we never actually see them sort of get right on top of it, it just kind of feels like us repeating what we had before. Whereas if you had a more of a first contact situation where they're right on top of it, they're moving ever closer, there's a ticking clock, that would be more effective. That would be a better way of ramping up the tension. And it's perhaps not helped here because we keep cutting back from the action to Data saying processing. It's still processing.
It's basically Star Trek storytelling by the numbers, isn't it? You've got they're about to do something rash. They're about to warp into the Borg cube while the other members of the bridge crew are out there finding the actual way they're going to save the day. This is done all the time in Star Trek, so it makes sense that if they're going to defeat the Borg, they're going to do it the way they always do.
In a 45-minute time frame.
I think, again, that's another thing that I don't think they get across. It feels like it all happens over the course of... It does feel like it happens across the course of about 45 minutes or a few hours. You almost want it to be several days or at least a week. It just feels like we're going to this, we're going to this, we're going to this, and it just doesn't feel like... It feels like Picard's been off the ship for, 2 hours or something like that. And in that time, they've destroyed half of Starfleet, and he's given all his knowledge to the Borg and been able to protect them, and then Riker's outwitted him and dealt with himself being the captain and had to accept that letting go, and the crew have had to deal with this transition, and then it's all back again. It just doesn't feel like any of these changes in the status quo have any time to bed in, and I think it feels smaller for that.
And one element that we haven't perhaps addressed, but is a little odd, perhaps, is the fact that for everything that the crew are doing, what is ultimately saving them is the fact that Picard is fighting back. It kind of feels out of nowhere a little bit. But is it because Data's interference in his mind has opened a gateway to allow him to fight back? But I'm sure there are multiple websites that will tell me.
once a Borg is removed from the collective, they do start to become individual again. So Locutus has been removed from the Borg, so he's becoming an individual, and therefore this is the avenue for Picard to return. As Locutus is now vulnerable, he no longer has the strength of the collective. That makes perfect sense. That works with everything we know about the Borg that's established in, well, Voyager, basically.
I guess the one thing I want to talk about a bit, and I suppose this ties into the ending, is the character of Shelby, who was so excellent in that first episode, because she came in, she ruffled feathers, she got the job done, and she was a foil to Riker. And then in this episode, she's just sort of like, I'm sorry, Riker, now you're captain, I'll be really sort of subservient to you. And I really wanted some more moments where she, told him he was wrong, or gave him an alternative, and he had to listen to that. But it just seemed like she was just another background character now, and just following. It didn't seem like they managed to develop her in the same way that she was interesting in that first episode.
They needed to have her tell Riker that he's doing something wrong, and he continue doing it, and it be the right thing to do. They need to establish that Riker is ready to be a captain by him basically overriding his first officer and being right in doing that. I do feel like Shelby kind of came onto the show at the wrong time, because if it was a year later, she'd have probably been in the running to be in Deep Space Nine. I think on the strength of her 2 episodes.
But again, it's that whole thing where you're like, oh, could she be joining as a new character? And you sort of think, well, the show could benefit from that. But at the end, well, I'm off to do this job. Nothing has changed. And even if it was something as small as we've brought a new series regular on board, it would have been nice to slightly shake up the status quo at this point. I think it just would have added something, and just, this has made a difference. That this event has changed things fundamentally. But I guess the fundamental is that episodic storytelling somewhat requires the show to stay the same. I think there's a balance to be struck, and I think the show was slightly on the wrong side of that balance at this point.
I think the issue with Next Generation is they've got a completely full cast, and it's not like a character is about to leave in a few episodes' time that they could easily replace with Shelby or with another new character. So, what could they do?
The thing is that how hardcore fans react to a changing of the status quo. Especially if those fans are of the band Status Quo.
I think Star Trek fans do tend to accept a change to the status quo quite a fair bit. We've got Worf joining Deep Space Nine, and then we've got Ezri Dax replacing Jadzia Dax, which both accepted very well. We've got 7 of 9 joining Voyager, which was very well received. I think by and large, Star Trek fans are very accepting of changes like that. The only time they aren't is when they completely screw it up, which they did with Pulaski.
And maybe the show was wary of that. Essentially, they had brought in a new character and ended up bringing back the old character a year later. So you can understand, because it's a difficult balance, and as I understand it as well, the cast did not take well to a new regular joining as well. So you have all that to take into account, keeping everyone happy, and already I'm sure a lot of them are thinking, I don't get any stories, I don't get very many lines, and they're bringing in this new, more interesting character. Well, how's that fair? So I can see why they wouldn't, but I think for the good of the show, it could have used a bit of a kick up the arse.
And in terms of changes to where we are, the way that the episode finishes, I realise that there is another episode to come, which we'll look into it a bit more, but I don't know. Is it enough? There's a poignance to it that Picard is affected, but does it go far enough? I can't decide.
Well, that's the point, really. The third episode is basically dealing with how badly it has affected him. So, I think viewing any of these episodes in isolation is unfair when it's so good as a whole. As a 3-episode storyline, it's amazing. And I think to pull out individual episodes and say it didn't live up to this episode, or it left you on the wrong note when you've got this other episode to come, I think it's unfair. And I do think that the reception of Best of Both Worlds Part 2 by pretty much all of Star Trek fandom is unfair. I am one of the people who will defend Best of Both Worlds Part 2 a massive amount. It's one of the earliest episodes I remember. One of the earliest memories I have is of the Enterprise going through the graveyards of Vol 359. It really is an episode that I cherish as one of the episodes that got me into Star Trek.
Well, I think we've probably covered everything. We're sorry to disappoint you again. Don't leave us reviews asking us to like Star Trek when it's good, because that's just far less interesting.
Well, actually, and that's a point. You're saying that Star Trek needs a kick up the arse, but the Star Trek's good now. This is the point at which it gets really good.
It is really good, but I think I just wanted, because that first part is so special, you kind of want it to keep going in that vein. But anyway, let's talk more nonsense and quickfire.
Quickfire.
The Borg, perhaps, as you said earlier, weren't as threatening as they could have been. They tried to put everything on Locutus, but say what you like, that Borg queen that was there in the background really was quite sinister.
It's great detail. I'm glad they put that into the remastered. I particularly like the line where they say, I think it was looped in later, there are no survivors, except Benjamin Sisko and his son Jake, who got away in an escape pod with that other guy. That's right.
To be fair, they don't say everybody is dead, do they? They just think that there are no survivors. There may be some survivors.
The Battle of Wolf 359 is revisited again in Star Trek Deep Space Nine's pilot episode, Emissary, and Patrick Stewart reprises his role of Locutus for that, which is nice.
I may have missed something in this episode or the last episode, but I wasn't sure why Picard had taken on the name of Locutus of all names, especially when the Borgs are supposed to be collective and he's identified by one name. So I don't know if that's actually revealed anywhere. I did ask my wife, but her answer was that he's called Locutus because he's got that low cute ass. So if anyone was wondering, apparently that's the answer.
They changed the transporter sparkle for this episode, which I think is quite important. They took the blue tinge away from the shimmer, leaving a white silver colour and smaller, more refined particles. I mean, when did they have time to change the transporters? Chief O'Brien just redoing it all the time? Isn't he busy doing other stuff? Hey, this is the first ever season 4 of a Star Trek show. How exciting is that? Although the original series at this point had run for more episodes due to longer seasons in the 60s.
Since it was last seen in the Arsenal of Freedom, the Battle Bridge set had been redesigned. I didn't notice.
This was the last time that the shots of the 6-foot Enterprise model was used until the movies, or the movie generations. Stock footage was used for the separation sequence itself, and would continue to be used throughout the series run. Did you notice the new classes of ships that were seen in the debris in the battlefield? Such exciting ships as Freedom Class, Niagara Class, Cheyenne Class, Challenger Class, Springfield Class, New Orleans Class, and Nebula Class. Marvellous. Marvellous stuff. If you noticed that, please do send us in some pictures.
And remember, we can't return your artwork. It's physically impossible.
So, somebody concocted a fake version of Best of Both Worlds Part 2 in which it ended with it all being a big prank by Q. Which, if this was in the days of the internet, I think there would have been complete meltdown if that was leaked. I think it's unfortunate that these were not the internet days, 1990. The internet was in its very early days then. It's unfortunate we don't have fake spoilers anymore like that. I mean, we have a few with Doctor Who, Norman Lovett's Davros, that type of thing, but we don't really have a quality of fake spoiler like, it all turns out to be a prank by Q.
So on the DVD documentary, we have Michael Piller talking about the episode, where he says, I created an unsolvable problem, and to be honest, as I started writing the second part of the cliffhanger that was supposed to resolve the story, I just didn't know what it was going to be that ultimately was going to beat them. In fact, I didn't discover it until the characters did. I probably wouldn't admit that, Michael. It makes you sound like a hack. Well, it's a new series and a new chance, so I guess we should pick it back up again. Does anyone want to know what the Nitpicker's Guide has to say about this episode?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
Well, that is the start of another season underway, but the end of this episode of First Contact. We'll be back again when we will be talking about family. But for now, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. I did not understand that reference.
Discovery.
So it's this pilot of Discovery where they have the big space battle because everybody wants to see big space battles.
Oh wow, was it? I've watched that episode and I don't even remember that.
Exactly.